Hey there, welcome to Growth Minded. I'm Ed Hayes. My mission is to empower others to be the best they can be through the Growth Minded podcast, exclusive interviews, and personal training. In today's fast paced world, businesses are facing scrutiny from stakeholders, including board members, regulators, customers, and prospects. So, trust and accountability are becoming more important now than ever, which is why CPA firms, for example, provide system and organizational controls, which is something that allows companies to build trust with stakeholders by proactively taking stock of the controls in place to mitigate risk and basically ensure transparency into the effectiveness of the risk management efforts. So to get your attention, to sustain longevity, you have to evolve. So whether you're an individual or an organization. So I was a little intimidated when I first heard about SOC reporting. So after speaking a little bit with Scholastica, I'm excited for her to have this platform to share and explain what SOC reporting is to the average person to understand. And hopefully by the end of this episode, everyone will be ready to take their CPA exam after this podcast. Kidding, obviously. But today, again, I'm joined by Scholastica Okoye, an experienced assurance associate at BDO USA. Scholastica is an accounting professional with consulting experience and transferring into audit services and working on acquiring her CPA license. Quick side note, she also helped me secure my first interview with Johnson & Johnson. I don't think I mentioned that to you, but I remember being at RUSA one time and I was telling you about an interview, and then you're like, did you follow up with the recruiter? And I said, no. So, a day or two goes by and I followed up, and then I took it from there. But so, outside of the auditing and the expertise, she also has a lot of practical suggestions. So that's now a part of my interview process. So I just want to thank you for that and welcome Scholastica to Growth Minded today.
Thank you so much for having me, Eddie.
Yep, looking forward to learning a little bit more about SOC reporting as basically, an average, I bet probably even below average understanding of what SOC reporting is. So I'll kick it off to you to explain a little bit about SOC reporting, why they're necessary, and maybe what some of the benefits are to the audience.
Yep. So SOC reporting, which as Eddie mentioned earlier, stands for Systems and Organization Control Reporting, not to be confused with Security Operations Center, which is something completely different. Is basically producing different kinds of reports that are going to be enabling a user to be comfortable with a service organization giving them services. So at the end of the day, as we're producing these reports, and it might be like a SOC 1, SOC 2, or SOC 3 report, or other different kinds of variations, that's at the end of the day what we're trying to do, give comfort and build trust. And also, it allows the service organizations that we help to actually save time. So instead of having them, sort of run around, have their own internal auditors try to gather the information year over year and sort of prove that, they're good enough to provide a service, they can just sort of whip up the SOC report and, work with our auditors to make sure that they're getting that information through to their clients.
Cool. So for an example, what would be an example of like a business, and maybe maybe an example of a regulator or a customer, for example? I'm not too well versed in that piece of it.
Yep. So for example, say I'm starting a company that sells clothing, and as a result of starting my company and developing my business, there is another firm that maybe I'm interested in working with or partnering with, and that firm is a little bit more established. Say in order for that firm to feel comfortable doing business with me, as I'm like the new person on the block, they might ask for a SOC report to say, hey, we just want to make sure, with our risks associated with our business, that when you come in and maybe help us as some kind of a third party vendor for, clothing or whatever,
Mhm.
that, your standards with the way that you're running your business is going to be up to par with the standards that we require. And depending on, if they're looking for a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, that sort of need is going to change related to that service. So if it's a SOC 1, it could be that, they're more focused on the financial reporting side of things. They just want to make sure, all of the financial reporting related controls in place are secure. And I can go into detail about what controls are, because maybe the average person doesn't necessarily know.
Yeah, that would be a big help, I think.
Yep, sure. So a control, and what in this context we're referring to is like internal controls, is basically those things that a business has that they use to manage the risks associated with their business. So say, for example, I work at a retail company. We're going to have a lot of transactions during the day. We want to make sure that as we're settling transactions with, the public, maybe we're selling to the public as a retailer, that our transactions are accurate. And so we might have as an internal control, for example, that the person who handles the cash register, isn't also, maybe recording the transaction like accounts payable, that kind of thing, to make sure that, as our transactions are settling, they're settling in the right way and being recorded in the right way. So there are a bunch of different kinds of internal controls, some that are, related to financial reporting, and therefore we call them financial related internal controls, as well as those that are non-financial controls that are not related to financial reporting, but are also going to be important for the business's goals, because a business typically has more goals than just meeting the annual, quarterly, biannual financial reporting requirements. So yeah, that's an internal control. And in the context of SOC reporting, we're always, controls is the name of the game. We're looking at controls that are going to be either related to internal control over financial reporting, which is ICFR, which I just sort of explained, and then related to trust services criteria, which, there are a couple in there, that are related to more so like security and other different kinds of things. So SOC 1 is going to be focused on any internal controls related to ICFR, the internal control over financial reporting, whereas the SOC 2 is going to be related to those trust services criteria. There are about 5 of them that are like specifically delineated by the AICPA and has recently been released through SSAE 18 standards.
So it sounds like the stock 1 is more financial driven.
Yep.
Am I following correctly? And then
Yep.
stock 2, what's the difference between the 1 and 2?
Yep. So, yep, as you said, the SOC 1 is more so related to any of those internal controls that are going to affect the financial reporting process. So maybe as a typical like financial statement auditor is going through and they're looking, at the balance sheets, they're looking at the various financial statements, the income statements, that kind of thing. They're going to be looking at the numbers, but they're going to bring in, or they're going to want to get a SOC report from a SOC auditor to help inform them about, maybe the different kinds of like systems, technology, and different things that will touch those accounts that are on the balance sheet, or those transactions that are on the income statement. So for example, we might be looking at maybe code changes related to a system that is used to record accounts payable transactions, and looking to see, whether or not that system is operating properly. Whereas the financial statement auditor is going to be looking at what's actually the journal entry, in the accounts payable account. Like, did that tie to the general ledger? When the book is closed, did they close in the right way? Were there, sort of risks involved, and that kind of thing. And so that's all SOC 1. SOC 2 is different because it can have, it can touch both financial and non-financial internal controls. Basically, the SOC 2, you're going to have the trust services criteria be the center of focus and attention. And these trust services criteria, I feel like they are named appropriately because they are basically those criteria which an organization is going to use to determine whether or not they can trust the services that a certain organization is providing. So the trust services criteria, which the AICPA came out with, there were like several different versions. There's like a whole history. I'm not going to go into it right now. But yeah, the trust services criteria, there are about 5 of them, one of which is required, 4 of which, clients sort of like add on as is necessary for the business. But the 5 are security, processing integrity, privacy, transactions processing, and I feel like I'm missing one in there. Basically, there are 5, and security is required. I can go into, sort of each of the 5 as well, but the SOC 2 is specifically related to all of the internal controls that are specifically related and delineated, like specifically to those different 5 criteria, or the one or whichever one is going to be thrown into the audit. So that's SOC 2. And, the SOC 1, SOC 2, another difference between them is also the users. So the users of a SOC 1 report are typically going to be your financial statement auditors because they're the ones that are doing the audit, but also it can be members of management who are caring about the bottom line side of things. Maybe it's as someone in management who is going to be engaging in new strategic partnerships and just wants to know, from a high level point of view, as it relates to the bottom line specifically and the financial reporting process, what risks a new vendor they might bring in may pose. Whereas the SOC 2, the user is restricted to typically people in the IT organization, people who are touching the systems or the organizational controls that are related on a day-to-day basis. So people who are like the supervisors of the coders, they might be like a COO, chief risk officer, CTO, CIO, depending that kind of thing for a SOC 2. The people that read a SOC 2, and it's going to be the one with the most information between the SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3. They're the ones who actually understand what's going to be in that report because not everyone is. So that's SOC 2. And then the SOC 3, which, I know I talked a little bit about SOC 1, SOC 2, but the SOC 3 is, the easy one where it's like, some of these companies, they want to maintain trust with the public. That's the only one that they can sort of physically share technically with the public. The way that it's produced, SOC auditors will still look at the information from the perspective of the same way they would look at a SOC 2. But when they actually produce the report is like a super abridged version with like barely any information, basically just confirming, this company's okay, kind of thing. And that can be posted to our clients' websites who request it.
Cool. So it definitely sounds like you're explaining the differences there.
Yep.
SOC 1 report sounds like more financial driven, and the users are different. Same with SOC 2, the difference having non-financial controls as well. I'd be interested to I'm sure maybe as the call goes on to hearing more about what a non-financial control may be, because we have an example of a financial control that you mentioned earlier, just off the top of my head. And then so SOC 3 reporting sounds more like, obviously a brief version and available for the public. So yeah, as the call goes on, feel free to explain a little bit about maybe some non-financial controls. And then, for the average person, let's say I have a business and I know what SOC report would be right for me to use.
Yep. So on the question about like non-financial controls, it's going to be those things that aren't necessarily touching the financial statements. So for example, when you hire someone into the firm or into your company, there's going to be certain things associated with that process that are not going to end up on your financial statements. Typically with the hiring process, the thing that you can think of that does show up is like say like with the timesheets, like the salaries and the wages. But different things like maybe somebody got, promoted, that may not actually flow through to the financial statements immediately, but there are going to be some internal controls around that, maybe that process is, defined and delineated properly, for the company to be able to make those, have that kind of performance cycle in a proper way. Even at the beginning when you're first hiring a candidate, things like being able to specifically define like the job description, very basic things that like are incredibly necessary, for the business to function and or will help them to meet their goals, but are necessarily going to touch the financial statements like as directly, or end up on any of the financial reports. So specifically in non-financial control, so for example, yeah, would be that the job description is defined and provided to the new hire, and upon hire, the new hire is trained, and that training is tracked on XYZ platform, something like that. It might be like a non-financial control.
Let's say I have a business and I'm
Yeah,
not sure which SOC report would be right for
yeah,
me. How could I be able to make the
make the call.
yeah.
Yep. So it would depend on the service that you're looking for. So say there's company A, company B. Company A is the service organization, and company B is the user organization, meaning company A is trying to provide services to company B. Company A is the vendor, company B is the one evaluating whether or not they want to even hire this vendor. Typically, and this is a huge value of the SOC reports, even these days, like clients, and when I say clients, I mean my client's client, um, they won't hire my client unless that SOC report is in. Like they don't even want to do business with them otherwise. So we have the A, the B. And so, in this case, one thing that you might want to consider is what is the service, what specific service is a service organization providing to the user organization? Because depending on that service, it may make sense to do a SOC 1, a SOC 2, or if a SOC, and if a SOC 2 is being done, having an add-on of specific services. So say, for example, it's like financial services that are being provided. And that may involve, if a SOC 2 is chosen, like the transactions processing, trust service criteria. Whereas, or at least processing integrity. Sorry, I confuse the two sometimes, transaction processing integrity. But yeah, so that may be involved. So that's one piece of it. What is the actual service being provided? The second thing I would consider is like the context in which the service is being provided. Is it the like is it the first time that this service is being provided? Because if it's the first time, it's the first SOC report, you may want to sort of do a type 1, which I didn't go into, but I can go into later. And another thing that needs to be considered is who the user is. So on the client side, that is company B side, who is actually the one who signed to say, we want this service, and we need information from you about how you're going to affect our company risks. Because depending on the person, I mean, if it's like the COO, they're gonna, maybe want to see a few different things versus, some other member of the IT organization, or something like that. Depending. Sometimes, in some cases, it can even be a regulator who is the user of the SOC report. So that needs to be considered as well. So in the case that, say, for example, it's like management, and the management is in technology, most likely a SOC 2 is going to make sense for them. If it's management, but it's like the CEO, probably a SOC 1. And then additionally, if it's an auditor, if it's like a financial statement auditor, it's going to be SOC 1. And also, if the context is, we're trying to meet financial reporting requirements, period, it's a SOC 1. If they're trying to get all the information possible, it would be a SOC 2.
Mhm.
And then if they are members of the public, it would have to be SOC 3. It can't be SOC 1 or SOC 2 because it's restricted. So that's, sort of a few different things that I would consider, in these things. And one thing I do want to say, I am a BDO employee. Probably should have said this earlier. I am a video employee, but everything that I say in this chat, I don't want it to be construed as like legal advice or financial advice, or any kind of thing. It is my personal opinion, based on what I've seen so far.
That's and, that's a great explanation there. It sounds like it depends. So I was asking,
Yep.
if I'm a business owner, how do I know when the SOC is right for me? And it depends.
Mhm.
You're saying on the user. If it's more financial driven, SOC 1. If you're the CEO, maybe SOC 1. And
Yep.
like you said, this is just your advice. And
Not necessarily representing the views
yep,
of BDO.
yep, exactly.
Yep.
So yeah, that definitely answered my question. As let's say I am a CEO. In this case, I have the SOC 1 report. It comes on my desk. What would be the most important section of the report that I want to take a look at if I want to get just a quick high level overview? Because
Mhm.
from what I've heard, it can be pretty extensive, right? And from what I've watched too, um, companies may, and correct me if I'm wrong, but companies may only go through the entire SOC report if there was a risk caught. Is that correct?
Yeah. So a lot of people may not actually read the whole report. So it's definitely good to know those spots where it's going to be the key. For a CEO, I would say the actual opinion is important, to see whether or not it's unqualified, qualified, like and we call unqualified reports like a sort of a clean report, meaning to say that, we sort of analyzed everything, and as far as we know, related to the controls from what we tested, we're not going to be qualifying the report, as in saying that, and the company's basically not going to meet, the requirements to the level necessary. Um, but yeah, the opinion is probably a very important section to look at. Probably the first thing I would look at. The second thing that might be important also is those things related to like user entity controls, because um, when we provide a SOC report, typically, like depending on the way that it's scoped out, we may or may not be giving an opinion on any entities related to the service organization that affect, the way that a control can be carried out, um, as well as on the user side too. So it's important to sort of look and see what the implications may be, from the user entity control sections that may be called out, and like the CUECs as well, which is like complementary user entity controls. Um, and I mean, if they want some like extra reading, they can look into like the description of the system if they want. But a CEO may not need that level of information. I would say the first two is where I would focus on.
Great, thank you. And
Yeah.
I also saw, like being in a supply chain organization, I saw there were SOC reports for specifically a supply chain organization. So
Yep.
to me, so far it makes, I'm I'm sure there's a gap in my understanding, but I know supply chain organizations have many stakeholders, suppliers, and processes to follow.
Mhm.
Can you provide additional details on why SOC reports may be necessary for specifically supply chain organizations?
Yes, because there are a lot of entities that need to be considered, like bottom line, in the way that a supply chain company does business. Um, and so that report is sort of specifically called out to meet that need, basically. But in terms of the way that we're going to, look at things, we're always at the baseline going to have some level of, the approach to SOC 1, the approach to SOC 2 handy as we're going into that analysis. But there's also certain like regulations that need to be met for like supply chain entities. And so you might also see like the regulators becoming involved as users there too.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any additional speaking points that you want to hit regarding the reports?
I mean, I'll make a shameless plug for BDO. I really love it here. I did just start, so I am, fresh on the block too, but I think it's an amazing company. Um, and I love my team. I love the people that I've met so far, and continuing to get to know people. It's definitely been interesting going from management consulting to auditing, but I know I really wanted to get into audit. I really wanted to do accounting, and so I'm really glad to be here now, and really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I liked about your like I did a little research on your LinkedIn profile, and you consider yourself a lover of learning and an advocate of thinking. So I think this episode ties nicely into the mission that you have for yourself.
Yep. Yep, for sure, for sure. Learning so much at BDO. I That was one of the things that really stood out for me. Their insights, it's amazing, and it's really thoughtful. The work that they put into it, and automating things as well.
Great. So any last thoughts before I close it out?
Um, No, just thank you again so much. Eddie, we also met through RUSA, which is the Rutgers University Student Assembly, which was an amazing experience, being involved in various committees, being like elected. So I'm just really happy that, we have our sort of different walks of life, and, we're checking in with each other, and that kind of thing, and staying in contact. And I'm so excited to see, the growth minders, whoever they might have questions, they can always reach out to me if they want. They can also look at the video website for more information about SOC reporting. But, I'm just really happy to be on, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. So we'll close it out. This was Growth Minded. I was joined today by Scholastica Okoye, and we were speaking on SOC reporting for the average person. I hope that everyone's ready for their CPA exams. Those next month. All right. Thanks again.
Thanks.